Hope I took an account everything. Hello everyone, we are on Angular Kharkiv Meetup. Let's also check here. Broadcast started. I want to say, before we start with presentations, I want to say a few words about our group. So that's here I provided some links, so you can find us on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, and also we have our Telegram channel. I think it's nice, or I can share this also links in our YouTube chat. Also a few words about our good sponsors. Company JetBrains, that is always our sponsor with licenses. Company Dux, that provides special price. If you register, if you didn't register yet by this link, you can register for and win nice pair of headphones, and also StayTube company. Also, I put my Twitter tag here, so you can ping me for any questions. If you want to speak on one of our meetups, you're more than welcome. Or for any related questions, also ask me. A few more organizational questions. We decided this time to start with StreamYard. It looks like it's better organized, and we can broadcast via YouTube, so there is no limitations. And for amount of participants like we had previous time with Google Meet, and I hope everything is fine. If not, let me know. Speaking about languages, we are doing it second time in English to have more broader audience and to make it possible to invite also international speakers. But if you feel like not very comfortable of asking questions in English, so you can also ask in Russian or Ukrainian, and I will translate it for you, not to have any barriers to ask questions. And speaking about our agenda, you probably already saw it. I removed time from here, so we will try to do it the time, but you know how it goes. We can, like, one talk could take a bit longer, another talk could be a bit shorter, but we will stick to this order at least. And yes, I think that's it. According to our agenda, we start like in 7 minutes, but we can do it now. I hope everything. One more guest, Dmitry is here. So let me give the word to our first speaker, Manfred. I don't know whether you need any introduction. I don't know, the person who knows Angular already know your name, and you are connected to so many subjects. So please, Manfred, share your screen and.
With pleasure. Yeah, thank you, Stefan, for having me. So this is one of my current favorite topics currently, because a lot of my customers needs this topic, and it's called module federation. I will show you how to combine this with Angular. And for this, I want to start with a picture with this here. Perhaps you've seen it before. It was drawn by Leonardo da Vinci. In 1400 something, he designed a helicopter like this. In 1400 something, how cool is that? The thing is, he only designed this helicopter because he didn't have the right material for building it. But nowadays we have the right material, and scientists tried to build it and they found out it really flies. How cool is that? And this little story somehow reminds me to micro frontends, because the idea has been around for years. But so far we lacked of the right material. We didn't have the right material to build it in a proper way. But first of all, what do I mean when I'm speaking about micro frontends? Well, basically, I just mean that we are subdividing a big application into tiny parts. So instead of writing, in this case, a flight application, we are writing a booking application, a luggage application, a check-in application, and a boarding application. Obviously, this reduces the complexity of each of those parts. Plus, we can assign separate teams to those parts. That means each team can work on their part independently. They can extend it, they can add features, they can deploy it, and they don't need to speak much without each other. They don't need to coordinate with each other. They don't slow each other down. That means even though we have big software systems, we get back the agility of tiny teams. But the thing is, having a huge amount of micro front ends is not enough. It's cool for us developers. It's not cool for the user. Because the user don't want to start 50 applications each and every morning. They want to have one integrated application. And so we have to find a way to load all those tiny applications into a bigger one that looks like one integrated stuff for the users. I'm calling this bigger application the shell. Here I have a very tiny example for a shell. You have a main menu here, and when clicking here or there, separately compiled, separately deployed clients are loaded into its working area. Here, for instance, the client from localhost 3000 is loaded here into this working area. And the thing is, and this closes the cycle to the story of Leonardo da Vinci, this was not really possible before. Well, we could have used some dirty workarounds, but there was no nice, straightforward way for achieving this, for loading one single page application into another one. And this is changing now. Webpack 5 Module Federation is changing this. And this is what this whole talk is about, isn't it? I will start with Module Federation in general, and then I want to show you how to use it together with Angular. And also then I will give you a roadmap so that you know when you can use it for your big enterprise applications. But first of all, let me introduce myself. I am Manfred. I am a trainer and consultant for Angular. I am helping a lot of people around the world with Angular, especially Angular in the enterprise area, Angular for enterprise scale applications. And I'm also quite connected to the Angular community. I live in Austria. This is where my accent comes from. I'm doing a lot of stuff in Germany, and I'm always happy if I can work together with people around the world, companies around the world. Nowadays, this is quite simple because in days like this, we are doing everything remotely, don't we? Okay, so let's get started with the first chapter, with Webpack 5 Module Federation in general. There is one big question this new technology is answering, namely this here: how to load separately compiled code. And perhaps you say now, yeah, come on, Manfred, that cannot be that difficult because we have dynamic imports. And even before, we had the require statement. So why not use this statement to point to another application to load something from this application from over there? Well, the thing is, in theory, this works perfectly. In theory. In practice, this doesn't work at all with current bundling solutions like Webpack or other bundlers. And so it doesn't work with the Angular CLI either, because the Angular CLI is using Webpack underneath the covers. The reason for this limitation is that Webpack and all the other bundlers assume that everything is known at compile time. Everything needs to be there at compile time because everything is built together, everything is optimized together. Think about tree shaking, for instance, and then everything is cut into tiny pieces for the sake of lazy loading. But only then, and that's too late because we have a lot of different stuff upfront. We don't need to know everything at runtime. We don't need to know everything at compile time. We only need to know things at runtime when going with micro frontends. So this here would be too late. And so we get a sound solution for this by Webpack 5 and Module Federation. For this, Module Federation is introducing two roles. The first role is the host. I'm calling it the shell. And the second role is the remote. I'm calling it the micro frontend. And with Module Federation, you can configure both roles. For instance, you could define that the shell gets a mapped path, this URL here, MFE1, which stands for micro frontend 1. And so I can tell the shell, hey, this path, this URL MFE1 points over there to this micro frontend that has been separately deployed. And by the way, over there, it's also called MFE1. That's not a prerequisite. We can call it differently over there. We can call it, let's say, Manfred or Batman or Bruce Wayne over there would be completely okay. So this allows me to define an alias. On the other side, I can expose stuff. I can expose Angular components, Angular modules, just functions, just classes. It's really up to us. Everything I'm exposing gets a nicely mapped name like CMB for component. And now something beautiful happens. I guarantee you will love it. Now you can use a dynamic import in your shell. This dynamic import is leveraging the mapped paths, MFE1 and CMB, and so it points over there to the separately compiled and deployed application. It allows us to load the exposed stuff from over there. And the best of this is Angular does not recognize at all that we are going with module federation here, that we are loading separated compiled stuff. Because for Angular, this is just lazy loading. It is just a dynamic import. Underneath the covers, Webpack and Module Federation are doing the heavy lifting. Of course, to make the host capable of loading the micro frontend, it needs some metadata about the micro frontend. And this metadata is compiled into a so-called remote entry point. The remote entry point is emitted by Webpack when compiling the micro frontend. It's just a tiny file with a very tiny amount of bytes. And this file with the metadata should be loaded into the shell upfront. You can do it with a scrap tag. You can also do it in a more dynamic way by calling a function at runtime. This guarantees that the shell knows about the remote, that the shell knows about its URL and about other stuff it needs to consider when loading it. Of course, we also need to share libraries. Let's assume we are going with Angular. In this case, we have Angular core and all the other Angular libraries in the shell, but we also have it within the micro frontend. And obviously, we don't want to load it twice. Or let's say we have 10 micro frontends. In this case, we don't want to load it 10 times. No, we just want to load it one time. And so it's really cool to know that we can define several NPM packages as shared packages. If it is defined as shared on the left side and on the right side, it's only loaded once. And obviously, this brings a lot of performance because we don't need to download several things several times. Okay, so as you have seen, this is quite straightforward. But now the question arises how to combine this with the Angular CLI. Because the thing is, the Angular CLI is using Webpack underneath the covers. This is great. But the thing is also, it is shielding Webpack from us. And normally this is also great, because normally that means we do not need to mess around with the Webpack configuration. That can be quite complex, can't it? But in our case, this is a drawback, because in our case, we have the module federation config, and we want to find a way to squeeze it into the Webpack configuration underneath the covers. And fortunately, for this, there is an official solution. We could extend the CLI with a so-called custom builder. The custom builder is just an exchangeable strategy that tells the CLI how to build this or that. The CLI ships with several default builders. For instance, the default builder for applications is delegating to Webpack. The default builder for libraries is delegating to ng packager. And we could now implement a custom builder that delegates the module federation config to Webpack underneath the covers. And then the custom builder can delegate to the default behavior, to the default Webpack builder, which tells Webpack, hey, please now build this application. So at the end of the day, this is a matter of, let's say, 50 lines of code, give or take. Of course, we could handwrite such a builder, but you don't need to, because I already did this for you. I already built such a builder. It's called Angular Architects Module Federation. You can just npm install or ng edit. And basically, it does three things for you. First of all, it generates the skeleton for your module federation configuration. That means you don't need to learn this configuration by heart. You get a skeleton, 1 or 2 pages long, and this skeleton just needs to be filled in. You just need to fill in the placeholders in the skeleton. That's the first thing this plugin does for you. The second thing this plugin does for you is installing a custom builder enabling module federation underneath the covers. And also, this is the third thing, it assigns a new board for ng-serve. This is not a big deal, but it is quite convenient, because having different boards for ng-serve allows you to start your application side by side. One shell, several micro frontends side by side to try it out. To get started with this, you need 3 steps. First of all, you need to ng-add this to your application. Then you need to adjust the generated configuration to fill out the placeholders in the configuration. And then you need to ng-serve it, and that's all. So I would say, let's try that out. I'm always saying module federation is a bit like the 1980s. You need to experience them, otherwise you don't know what they are about. And that's why I've prepared a little demonstration for you. This demonstration here consists of a shell and of a micro frontend. And as you see here, both chains, this here runs at localhost 3000, the shell runs at localhost 5000. And now here the shell has a root called flights. And when I'm clicking this very root, then we see nothing, because it hasn't been implemented yet. This is now our task during this live coding part. At the end of the day, what I want to achieve is I want to load this separately compiled and deployed micro frontend into this very root here. And to do this, let's move out to our console. When we here look to the example that runs here, let me start Studio Code. Then we see that our example is just a mono repository consisting of my micro frontend 1 and my shell. You don't need to go with a mono repo. You could also go with several repositories. But here, for the sake of simplicity, it is just one repository with my two separately compiled projects. If we look into the package JSON, we see that I'm going with Angular 11 and also, of course, with the CLI 11. The CLI 11 is by default using Webpack 4. And that's not a good message because we need Webpack 5 for module federation. So what to do here? Well, the good message is we can force the Angular CLI into Webpack 5. The Angular team did a lot of effort to make this possible. The Angular team, and by the way, also our next speaker of today, Dimitri, he also invested a lot of time to help the Angular team to make this possible, to provide an opt-in for Webpack 5 into the CLI 11. So Dimitri, I really thank you for this. This was really a great job you and the Angular team did there. That means we can tell the CLI to use Webpack 5. And for this, we need to use those sections here. This section here, resolutions with Webpack 5, is forcing each and every dependency that needs Webpack into version 5. Currently, this is experimental in the CLI. That means you should not use it for production. There are some pitfalls, but it's good enough to get started with it, to try it out, and to find out if this is the right solution for your big application. And hopefully with CLI 12 in spring, we have a sound Webpack 5 integration. The thing is also, to respect this section here, you need to use yarn. NPM is not respecting this section out of the box. For NPM, there are some additional packages doing this. When you are going with yarn, you get out of the box support for this. Okay, awesome. This is what I did before. I forced it into Webpack 5 and I installed my dependencies with yarn. Now let's switch to my console. And here I have one tab for my shell. I have another tab for my micro frontend. Let's start with the micro frontend. Let's ng-add Angular architects module federation to enable module federation for my micro frontend one. This is now downloading the package, and then it will ask me two questions, namely, which application do you want to enable for module federation? The answer here is MFE1. And the second question is, which board do you want to use? And I want to go with board 3000. And bang, everything is now enabled for module federation. I'm getting several files generated and other files are updated. Under the generated files, I find this Webpack config. This contains the skeleton for my module federation configuration. You don't need to worry. This is not a fully blown Webpack configuration. It just limits to the points, to the entries you need for module federation. The rest is still generated by the CLI. This is the first thing. And the second thing I want to point out here is that this plugin is updating your Angular JSON to define the board in question, but also to register the custom builder, enabling module federation underneath the covers. Yeah, this is what I need to do for my micro frontend. Now let's do the same for the shell. Let's switch over to the tab for the shell. I'm entering this command one more time. Now it's the shell's turn. And for the shell, I want to go with board 5000. And the same stuff is generated and updated. Okay, let's jump to our source code. Here I'm starting with the micro frontend one. If we drill in here, we see we've got this Webpack config. And it's really only a partial Webpack config, just 2 screen pages, at least with my current font size. This contains everything we need for module federation. And first and foremost, this is about registering the module federation plugin. Here we've got two entries, both are commented out. The first entry is for remotes, or let's say for micro frontends. The second entry is for hosts, or to put it in another way, it's for the shell. So here we talk about the micro frontend one, you see it here. That's why I'm going with the first section, I'm skipping the second one. My micro frontend gets a name, MFE1. Its remote entry point gets a name. You remember, this is the generated file with all the metadata for the shell. And here I can expose stuff, like a module, which is exposed, and it is found in the file flights.module. Okay. Also, I want to share some libraries like Angular Core, Common, and the router. On the slides, you've seen the simplified version of this. When you go with the simplified version, you just assign the name of the libraries to share with an array. Here I'm doing a bit more. Here I'm assigning an object, and this allows me to configure my shared libraries. For instance, the combination of singleton and strict version is telling Module Federation that only one major version of Angular Core shall be loaded. If there are two different major versions, or to put it in another way, two non-compatible versions, if you change the major version, you have a non-compatible breaking change by definition, then you will get an error here. You will immediately get an exception. Something like, hey, this shell is using Angular 10 and the micro frontend is using Angular 11. You will immediately get an exception in the sense of fail fast. If I would skip this strict version flag, I would only get a warning, plus I would get the highest version. Angular 10, Angular 11, we would go with Angular 11. You see, there are several strategies baked into Module Federation to deal with version conflicts. There are even some additional ones, but for the time being, let's stick with this here. If there are different versions, I want to get an error, I want to fail fast. Because obviously, no one can guarantee that Angular 10 works seamlessly together with Angular 11. It might work, but you have to try it out for your case, no guarantees. Fail fast. Okay, so basically, I just configured my micro frontend, especially I defined the files to expose, and I configured the libraries to share. If we look into my flight module, we see this is just an ordinary Angular module with child roots. That means if I load this module into my shell, I can route to the routes defined here. Now let's proceed with the shell. Let's close the micro frontend one. Let's proceed with the shell. Also, the shell has a webpack configuration. It looks the same. Also, here we have two sections. One is for the remotes. I don't need it. The other one is for the host, which means shell in our case. So let's go with it. Here I just need to configure my micro frontends. I'm saying, hey, I want to map the URL MFE1, and it points over there to another micro frontend, which is also called MFE1 over there. And by the way, the remote entry point with all the metadata can be found here. This is what I'm calling static module federation. I'm directly hard coding the metadata, at least the location of the metadata. Static federation or static module federation. This is quite convenient for testing and also for debugging and for demonstrations, but obviously for live applications, for production-ready applications, this is not enough. For production-ready applications, you would go with an alternative, which I'm calling dynamic federation. And dynamic federation just means that you don't provide this information upfront. Instead of this, you provide it at runtime with some convenience function like load remote, something like this, where you pass in this very URL. Of course, this is a bit more complicated because things become a bit more dynamic, but as mentioned, for production-ready application, you will very likely go with this. Here, I'm sticking with the simple static version. Okay, cool. So I can point over there to my micro front end located at port 3000, and that's all I need to configure here. The shared section is the same. I want to share the same libraries. I shall also have a root configuration. App root. It's just a traditional Angular routing configuration, and here I can introduce a lazy route. And as all the lazy routes, you know, it has a path and it has a load children property pointing to something that loads the lazy module. Here I'm going with a dynamic import statement, loading the module from over there from my micro frontend. And the best thing here is, one more time, Angular does not even know that we go with micro frontends. For Angular, this is just traditional lazy loading. But Webpack, underneath the covers, knows that this path has been mapped in the configuration, and so it grabs over and loads something from there. This works perfectly at runtime, but of course, at compile time, this file is not known because this file does not exist. Webpack will resolve it at runtime. And that's why TypeScript is complaining. See here, TypeScript is saying, this does not exist, this does not work, this might be a mistake. And now, because of this, we need to ease TypeScript. We need to tell, hey, TypeScript, it's okay, trust us, we are experts, we exist at runtime. To ease TypeScript, we need another file. The name doesn't matter as long as it ends with DTS. Declaration DDS, for instance. If it ends with DDS, TypeScript will pick it up at compile time. And here we can say, hey, we know you don't know this file, but trust us, it will be there. And if we switch back now, we see it's now fine for TypeScript. Quickies are gone. Okay, that's it. So at the end of the day, you just need to configure module federations on both sides, and then you deal with lazy loading, perhaps using the router or perhaps with manually lazy loading components. That should be everything. So let's try it out. Let me start here my micro frontend, ng-serve mfe1. And at the same time, let's also start in the other tab, my shell serve shell -o. Of course, that takes some time now. You know, patience is a gift. The shell is built. Yeah, also the micro frontend was built. So here is everything green, and you know, if everything is green, you can ship it. No, please don't do it. By the way, we get sometimes a warning like this, but it is really just a warning, and you know, warnings are for hazards. No, just kidding. As mentioned before, the Webpack 5 integration for the CLI is still experimental, so please expect some warnings and some pitfalls. The same should be the case here for the shell. We have a warning, and we have here the output. So let's try it out. Let's reload this. Here we have localhost 5000. And now when I'm click to flights, hey, my micro frontend is loaded directly into the middle of my shell. Let's have a look to the network tab. Let's reload everything. Let's click here, and you see this chunk is really only loaded on demand. This is our micro frontend and only has 11.6 Ks, which really proves that we are sharing Angular. If we loaded Angular a second time, this bundle would be far bigger. Nice. So we have achieved something that was not really possible before, loading stuff from another origin at runtime. Localhost 3000 plus localhost 5000 here. Perhaps you like this, and perhaps you are wondering now, hey Manfred, when can we use this? Well, the thing is, you can start using Webpack 5 immediately because Webpack 5 is final. Also, CLI 11 is final. But the thing is, the Webpack integration into CLI 11, the Webpack 5 integration into CLI 11 is currently experimental. That means you need to expect some pitfalls, some warnings, some issues. You can arrange yourself with it, but it is more something for enthusiasts and not intended for production. You can start with it to play around. You can start with it to make an example for your architecture. But if you want to use it for production, I would recommend to wait until CLI 12, which is due in spring 2021. It's just a matter of several months. If you really need to start now, start with your micro frontends, integrate them with hyperlinks for the time being, and then when everything is integrated nicely into the CLI, you can throw away your hyperlinks and replace the integration with a shell loading everything on demand. By the way, if you like this talk, you might also like my free ebook. I've updated it about 2 weeks ago. It now consists of 4 chapters regarding module federations and some additional chapters regarding other stuff you should also draw into consideration when going with micro frontends and module federation. Stuff like domain-driven design, strategic design, NX monorepos, and web components. So you can download it for free. It's here at angulararchitects.io/book. Okay, let me come to a conclusion. We've seen that module federation allows you to do something that was not really possible before, at least not without dirty workarounds, namely it allows you to load separately deployed code. And this is the key for micro frontends, because micro frontends are separately deployed applications that are loaded into your shell on demand. And we've also seen we can combine this with Angular and the Angular CLI. Just Angie adds this plugin and you are fine. And there is one last thing I want you always to remember. Namely, this now is the time to become the next Leonardo da Vinci. So take your chance, become the next Leonardo da Vinci, design something you can build today because you have the right material. So thanks for having me. I have already uploaded my slides and my examples to my blog, and here you also have my Twitter address if you want to follow me to keep a bit in contact. Thank you.
Great, super. Thanks for presentation. I can watch it again and again. So let's go to Q&A. What do we have here? I see I can highlight the question. So what's the difference for if we're speaking about probably Angular CLI and NX tool?
Yeah, so, you know, NX is an extension for the CLI. Everything I've shown today is possible with both, with the CLI and with NX. NX is an extension which brings several additional features like access restrictions. With NX, you can define that one micro frontend is not allowed to directly communicate with the other micro frontend. And that's vital because you don't want to mingle everything up with each other. Another feature of NX is incremental compilation. That means you don't need to compile everything all the time. You only need to compile the stuff that has been changed, which speeds up your whole CI process. And there are some other advantages that are really nice when working on big projects.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Next one. How can you
not a problem.
Share data between micro frontends? It should be something like SSO or common channel like Nginx.
Yeah, that's a good question. The thing is, we have seen that I can share libraries like Angular Core, Angular Common. And the same way, you could share your own library, and this library could contain a communication service. In the easiest version, it is just a service with a subject so that you can trigger some domain event, something like, hey, this user was not logged in. And here you have the access token for the user. And so all the other parts of the system can receive this message and can work with it, can take out the access token and use it to talk to the backend. So sharing services is here the key for also sharing data. As this question also includes NGRX, I would not directly use NGRX for communication because NGRX is quite a heavy dependency and this would couple your micro frontends to each other. So I would prevent this. I would go with a simple communication service.
Okay, good. Going to the next one from Vitaly. What about the case when shell doesn't know about remotes at the build time and need to configure at write time?
Yeah, so in this example, I configured everything at compile time for the sake of simplicity, but you can do the same at runtime. It is just a matter of one function call. If you look up my plugin, you find an example for this. And in this case, this function call defines the location of the micro frontend. So it would be possible to load some configuration data when starting the shell, configuration data telling the shell, hey, this micro frontend is today found here, and another brand new micro frontend is found there. And then you can use this metadata to load everything dynamically.
Okay, thank you. And the last one about how can I forbid the user to access this port directly?
Well, the thing is you cannot. And that's not an issue of module federation. It's a general issue. No one can prevent you from loading a single page application from a given location. If it is publicly available, everyone can load your single page application into his or her own application. There is not even a same origin policy because the same origin policy is not defined for script tags. It is not defined for script tags, for images and other stuff. So you cannot really prevent it. One way to prevent it in a corporate environment would be to have a web application firewall that doesn't gives you access to a specific URL without having a specific cookie or a specific access token, and perhaps you only get the cookie when you are logged in. But if we are speaking about publicly available micro frontends, you cannot avoid this.
Okay, good. Thank you. And one more question appeared. It's in Russian, but let me try. I'm not sure that I understand the meaning, but I'll try to translate. Maybe it will be clear for you. So, is it possible to load dynamically load libraries that were not hosted, like plugins? So I translated the question directly, but not sure whether you got the meaning.
So I suppose that this question is about sharing something like Angular Core or Angular Common but you don't know upfront about those libraries. You really want to load them dynamically. So if you don't know about your shared libraries at compile time, if you don't know that you want to share Angular core, Angular common, then you need to go with traditional JavaScript. No one prevents you from creating a script tag dynamically, but you need to do this by yourself. There is no support from Module Federation for this. But you could, of course, load a script tag or a script with a dynamic script tag. Perhaps it just contains some functions that are put into the global namespace. Perhaps it contains some web components.
Okay, good. And one more, please. So it's super broad, probably. Best solution for having multiple micro frontend on one page.
Yeah, I think the best solution is what I've shown today, plus using dynamic federation, which means not hard coding everything, but finding out about the micro frontends at runtime. This is the best solution because it is straightforward and Webpack takes care of the heavy lifting underneath the covers. If you want to mix and match different frameworks in addition, then you need to combine this, what we've seen today, with web components. Then you have a React component and an Angular component, perhaps an Angular 10 component, an Angular 11 component, something like this. By the way, I've blogged about this week because this question comes on a regular basis. You find some information about this very question and also about other topics regarding this in my blog.
Okay, good. I think that's it. So the last question for you. What was the best question? We need to define who is getting the prize.
Well, best question. I think the question about communicating is quite important because you always need to communicate somehow. Of course, don't overdo it because you want to loosely couple your micro frontends to each other. You don't want to intermingle everything with each other, but normally you need several events to send back and forth. So this is quite a vital thing, if you ask me.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you very much for presentation and answering all the questions.
Thanks for having me. It was really a pleasure to be here.
We'll be glad to see you again somewhere on next meetups.
Cool.
And maybe conferences. Okay, good. We are moving forward to the next speaker. Let me add him to the stream and the presentation. Yes, Dmitry.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Martin, for your warm words. It's a real pleasure each time. Thank you.
I thank you for your hard work on helping the Angular team with Webpack 5. It's really cool.
Thank you. So, Stepan is stepped away instead of doing an introduction, or we should just start the presentation right away.
Yes, please. I think it should be somewhere in 12 minutes, but I think we can start it now. That's okay if you're ready.
Sure, always. So, as for today's presentation, I would love to discuss a very interesting topic for me personally, additional to, of course, model federation, which I was spending quite a lot of time lately. The other one is composition API, and it's really heavily related to obviously what I do and where I'm involved as a creator of a company which is Valor Software, which mostly Angular development workshop, NGX Bootstrap as a library, UI library for Angular, and Talk CEO as a conference organizer. For some reason, Google Developer Expert, hopefully for a good one. And you can find me on any social media or whatever as Valorkin everywhere. And before diving into the topic, I would love to introduce the problem, the way we do introduction for our task in our work. So the problem is that our components eventually became quite huge one, and it's always a good question why components became huge. So, and if we think about it a bit, we will understand that the only persistent thing we have in our work is a change. Whatever we develop, whatever we do, we always gather requirements. We always plan how perfect will be our small and shiny component. And at the end of the day, it's usually became a huge monster which you have to live with, change with, and new fixes, and so on and so on. And unfortunately, nobody gives a second chance or an option for a second thought about how to do that right, how to refactor it. So, and even reusable components, which sounds as a good option to quit this hell, eventually face the same fate that you develop a reusable component, then you add additional features and fixes, and those became huge and monstrous, unfortunately. But the worst part about the reusable component that, compared to regular components or component containers, they're even more limited about their knowledge of the context they will be used in. So they have to all the time add new inputs and new outputs. And not only the implementation becomes larger, but the API surface of our components became huge and hard to comprehend by the developers. So the process of trying to, or actually trying to reduce the complexity of those components is a taming application complexity, like in general. And this is not just Angular related. There are a lot of ways to tame your application complexity. Of course, we will cover some of those because it's a huge topic, and only to cover all of those, we'll have to spend several hours just to list those all of them. But there are some older, there are some that are newer concepts. There are a reason why it's called Angular Ivan Composition API. So we'll name the older one, and we'll discuss in more detail approaches which became more easily available with Angular Ivy. To clearly understand the need of the composition approaches, we need to get an overview of these approaches. And I would love to have a special thanks word to the Vue3 Composition API request for comments, which was happening around a year ago. And of course, I would not go fully with that approach, but it has some really cool ideas and thoughts which I took into Angular world and would love to use my own and to share with you. So could be will save you some time and nerve cells. As of goal of what we are trying to achieve here, right? Of course, we write in code not for computers. We developers write code for other developers or to ourselves in the future. So, and readable as non-functional requirement to your components or application implementation is quite an important thing to do because you're not working in isolation. Your teammates should be able to hop on and continue to work with it. As a maintainable code, it's how easy to fix or enhance existing code. Or obviously small and isolated chunks of code is much easier to maintain rather than huge and overcomplicated code. And also extensible, obviously, how easy you're able to plug in new features to it. So all of that sounds familiar because it's mostly parts of the solid principle. So as of code reuse practices, which you most likely know already. Base classes, abstract or not. Obviously you did or have seen those. Services is a go-to solution for any Angular application. Content projection or ng templates, whatsoever, any ways to use templates, which is a part of the component, or the component itself, or nest components in some other ways, especially when you develop reusable components. global state management like NGRX, NGXX, Akita, Mobix, Redux, whatever, plenty of ways you have heard of it for sure. Mixins and hardware components was around for a while, especially in like other UI libraries, but became much easier to use in Angular starting with Ivy. And of course, the topic of this presentation is a composition API. What we have on our plate at the end of the day. Of course, there are much more to discuss, but whatever approach you choose, there are no silver bullets, let's be clear. You always can end up with macaroni monster, which is waiting for you somewhere behind. So, mixins is a class that contains a method for use by other classes without having to be the parent class of those other classes. Sounds like a crappy thing, but if you will take a look on the top function of this sample, you will see that you're actually able to call this function and will have a new class inside of it, and it will create a new class and will extend it with additional methods or properties. So, sounds about right as a good idea, right? But while mixins is quite a new approach for Angular community, it's quite a lot for a long time around, and especially for React developers, it even became an anti-pattern somewhere around 4 years ago. So we should have some fun with it and move forward, because there are plenty of pros and cons, which we'll discuss later. But have to mention one more approach of the mixins with helper functions to mix static classes when you don't actually do all of that dynamic extension of the classes one by one as a function. So let's discuss. We'll get back to the mixins later on, but in general, mixin has a real good pros, and one of those is code organized by feature, which is something we would love to have. Reduced repetitive code, which is a great thing too. But on the bad part, there are name conflicts prone, because you never know which mixins add which properties. And obviously you have implicit properties and dependencies, and you don't know how those mixins could interact between each other, because they just simply override all of the things we just have. So if you need to reuse that mixin in some different scenario, you can have an issues with that. As a successor of the mixins, hardware functions and components take place on the stage, and we should understand this is very powerful concept and brings a lot of interesting options to the plate. But if you will take a closer look on this code sample, you will see some thetas. I'm not sure that my mouse is visible here, but if you'll take a look on const original factory equals component type dot theta factory, then you have component type dot theta component dot factory, which is both using Angular private API. Those APIs for years up there, but still doesn't sound about right to be used in production, but still a way to do those things. So you have, of course, should think about it if you have some restriction about using private APIs in production or not, like me. They serve the same reason as a mixins, but do it in a more major way. So if to speak of like hardware components, they obviously create properties, add explicit dependency if they need to. They mutate original component. They should not do that, or they will be just a mixin implemented a different way. What they should do, they should be adding additional behavior to the component. So they could be applied to one or many components, right? And it's a good thing to have, but they should not modify component. they should extend it. So they shouldn't override existing properties or methods, which is hard to get actually. And the fun part about it that components compared to mixins, which became the part of the components, higher components should extend, but the component itself you should be able to use that component with or without hardware component. Okay, so if a hardware component will introduce a property and that property used in template, then you're not able to use that component without your higher component wrapper, which is kind of obvious thing. So on the good side, they have same pros and positive things as a mixin, organized by feature, reduced repetitive code, lesser cons. So again, it's name conflict prone, and again, you can have implicit properties and dependencies, which could lead to some weird consequences. And we came to the composition API, which is the topic of our conversation. And unfortunately, it is not able to exist on its own. So it could be in some options if you go with Power Function or other implementation. If you wish to take a look on something like Clear View 3 composition API and Angular, there are pretty nice library which is ng effects. But it is, if you're planning to use it on your projects, that requires quite a mind shift from how you usually do things in Angular. And not only you will have to learn it, all of your team have to learn it. So it's actually a hard way to start using composition API. So as we know all the bad parts about the mixins, hardware components, and some other code reusable things, what are our key motivations for Angular composition API? What we should achieve? Like we should have explicit properties, dependencies, full or partial logic reuse, right? Organized code by features and reduce boilerplate code, which is a lot usually. As of component state, there are quite interesting idea that whenever you develop your Angular components and you have some observable, which is then used in template, it's something like doing something unnatural to your HTML. Basically, HTML is a snapshot at any given moment of time. So trying to combine async nature of the Angular application or user behavior with static nature of the HTML itself, it's always good reason for performance issues or even just any code issues. Other thing which happens a lot in any libraries or frameworks on UI right now because they load too much is that developers is able to trigger functions from HTML to, for example, calculate some property, which is again hits performance. So like to sum up, I would love to improve rendering performance in general. So let's start with a sample. Let's move by some example and trying to apply those ideas one by one to whatever we want to achieve. And we will pick up one component, basically any component you will find in a real application or libraries. You will see that it's one component, but many mixed features inside of it. So, and what we will try to achieve and how we will gonna split it. Logically independent parts, which we can split out, on which promises is often or rarely modified. Model vs view logic or model vs platform logic. And we will take a look on this thing. This is material checkbox component. It only 500 lines of code. And this is one of the simplest components of the material UI library. I honestly tried to make the screenshot less ugly, but as you could see, I have failed miserably about it. So that screenshot contains only inputs and outputs, and it's not even everything it had. So it's kind of complicated to just go there, open that component, and comprehend what is happening inside of that component. Imagine you have to enhance and fix it or add an additional kind of feature to this component. It could be quite challenging, right? So let's start with something simple and speak about inputs and outputs, what it is, how we use it, and what does that mean. So inputs and outputs, this is our API of the components, right? This is our documentation. This is our contract of communication we promise to developers who consume our components. And if we will split those 2 pages of screenshots into some comprehensible parts, you will see there are not many things new to you, which you would be able to understand much easier and never read it again if it would be split into some smaller parts. For example, global element identifier. It's written once and you will forget about it. You will never read it again for a good reason. Then we have accessibility attributes, which does not change often, correspond to, I would say, standard. So you write this once, you don't want to see it each time you actually modify your component, and it's rarely modified thing. As of inputs which could affect or will affect the behavior of this checkbox component, obviously input API, which is one-to-one to input checkbox attributes. Basically, if you know how input checkbox works in HTML, you will take a look on this screenshot. You will see that same names of this class, and you will see the same names used in, for example, Mozilla documentation. You don't even have to read the documentation here. Behavior of checkbox should correspond to input checkbox attributes. That's kind of something we would expect. If anybody of you was developing components which has to work with Angular forms, you know that you have to implement control value accessor. And as all of you know, it takes good 50 to 70 lines of code. To write a code, you will have a joy of watching each time, but you will never change it again. If you're writing several components which has to integrate with forms, you will be most likely copy-pasting your implementation of control value accessor. Everybody does it, so nothing to be ashamed of. And here we came to the attributes which actually make our material checkbox component unique. That's actually something you should know on top of basic input checkbox element. That's something which makes it special. And here we see only one input and a couple of outputs where actually change could be counted as almost a native event. So how hard would be to comprehend if you would know that you need only to understand these 3 additional fields to what you have already know from HTML. And this is where we will work, and this is what we will change in order to enhance or add additional feature to our component. You don't have to see everything else, just this part. And this is your work table. This is your properties which you will use in template. This will change most often. So, and that's fine. So, now let's build our shiny checkbox which perfectly implements just one thing. And here we go again. Just kidding. So that's fine. Of course, there are other options how we can combine all of those parts of API. That's something, as I said, that there are another approach to the mixings. And you are able to mix all of those properties together. And you could say, again, we have implicit properties. But I would say you don't care because those are just static properties. And in worst case, what you will have is some property types will not match each other. Then you need to mixture from different component classes, okay? And nothing bad will happen because they not yet have any functionality inside of that. So just by mixing classes with only static properties, you're solving quite a lot of things. No implicit dependencies, no implicit interactions, easy to reuse, and name clashing is not harmful. Of course, there are known issues which had to be solved somehow, like decorated inheritance not always works properly as of now, and on some samples you will see that I use empty directive attribute as a hack, because Angular says that you're able to use like input annotation only on something which has meaning in Angular, like directive or component. And directive could be empty, so that's fine, because if you use Angular material, they use those hacks, so most likely you use those hacks in production already too. So nothing bad will happen, or should not at least. So other point which makes us one step closer is observable lifecycle events, which most likely some of you could use, especially for engine destroy. But let's take one step further, and this one actually is in particular important for grouping features in the code, because if you have only methods of lifecycle in your main component, reuse those in parts of your component which you want to combine. It will be incredibly hard to just push those events. So your features should know about lifecycle events, of course. So here we can see how it usually looks, right? We have our component, we have our several interfaces we implement, and we see that there are some subscribe, additional properties, and that's what happens all the time. But what if we will introduce some observable lifecycle events? So we can unite all of this functionality, split it not by some predefined methods. Like our feature is split into 3 methods. And those methods, if you have a couple of features in one component, obviously those methods will have a part of the features in each of those, which could be annoying eventually. And here we can take a look, like if we have observables, lifecycle events, we can even await for this code actually works, just in case. You can even await for something which happens once, like on init, after content init, right? And you can destroy whatever you don't need to, unsubscribe after on destroy, which looks pretty neat in one place, and you don't have to create additional properties on your component in order to unsubscribe eventually. And this is one of the things in composition request for comments in Vue 3, which actually made a real deep impression on me. This simple idea, different colors here means different feature inside of one component. And this picture show that there are good goal for developers to actually group features in one place, not to split them across the component, which makes it real hard to comprehend and eventually to change. And as far as we remember, change always happens. So as soon as we're able to flatten our spaghetti code as some kind of lasagna up here, and one of the options which actually allows us to do is observable lifecycle hooks, because that's something from the core which pushing us to mix parts of the features and do all of this funny thing. So the functional split, we discussed split of the API. We discussed observable lifecycle events. Now the best part is functional split. I would say the hardest one. And we will briefly discuss some of the options we have for functional split per features. And of course, here I thought that should some kind of representation of the services, for example. But whatever like screen I would have, that would be not representative. Or for example, Angular material complete, just 1,500 lines of code. So it's like easy peasy to maintain for sure. It's in one file and has some services additionally in order to handle all that funny thing, and utilities and base classes. So enjoy. But obviously that's doesn't mean that's a bad code. That's code written in the terms how we get used to do those things. And we are still complaining about jQuery files for the same amount of lines, which has actually better grouping the features. Obviously, service is a good option, but linking usage of those services to component state is still responsibility of the component and template, and this leads to a huge amount of the boilerplate code. One more honorable mention is to Nginx component state, which was released around 3 months ago. I would say that in Nginx Bootstrap, we use that for around 3.5 years already. We have much lesser implementation on 40 lines of code, which allows us to use effects, actions, reducers, and stuff, but without all of this fancy things in documentation, of course. But still, Nginx component store is something you should take a look if you want, especially, for example, for model federation, if you want to have a component which is able to self-manage its state and don't share it, because Nginx store has a state management with a root for application, while Nginx component store has a root in your component. So each instance of your component will have independent state, which is nice to have. This is a sample of the code from ngFX, which I was mentioning before. This one-to-one implementation of this view composition API RFC, which, if to take a look, reference to 0 is subject of a number, right? Reactive is the same thing as subject of an object, plus minus with a difference. But here you work with the functions, and it became more interesting to work with injection, right? We get used to have a services. We want to inject something to our functionality. We will still want to use same patterns as we have used before. So going just with this sample will require you to change the way you think and how you use Angular. So that's a good thing to try, but just be warned. Back to features integrations. Using services or injection tokens to provide feature implementation is nothing new, obviously. Dependency injection allows us to gracefully handle most of cross dependencies and injection issues. But how we'll mix it with our components and how bind value properties to some functions. So what are our implementation requirements? Minimal or zero private Angular API usage, performance, of course, and use cases coverage, and something to come. So, as of reasons to have a methods or bind methods to your component, there are actually not so many, because most of the methods you have on your component is something you want to use, for example, from your template. For example, to allow a user to trigger an action from a component template. And obviously, one of the options you have here is simply used helper methods, like bind methods. Here is a sample of a helper method which removes the boilerplate of binding between methods provided by a service and methods declared on your component. So you have declaration of method, but it's empty, while service provides an implementation and you're able to reuse it with almost no boilerplate. Funny part here is that this setup could be called from inside the component, which is right approach, or you could have a service which injects the services, as some Angular developers love to do. As of other approach, as a reason to have a method on the component, or methods in these schemes like getter setter, but it's still something which will be called as a function internally. So if you do some calculations on a get, this is performance heavy operation. If you do that on a set, basically you're reacting to a property change from a template, or whatever other reason it's changed, by example set interval. And again, this code requires you to have one private property and a couple of things on top of it, which is plus minus boilerplate. here we have onSet helper method, which you could like imagine how it works, and two options how it could be implemented. So whenever you need that setter and you try to avoid this boilerplate, you should be able to do that almost a one-liner. Other reason for us to have some methods is react on change. Obviously, here key is type check. So one of the important things when you develop such approach is that it's compile time checked. Even if it's using like name of a property as a string, it still should be compile time checked. Thanks God we add even times of TypeScript, and this is easily possible, right? So on change you can do simple things like on set, just to convert string value to number, or calculate some additional value like in second line, or more complicated things which reacts to when a couple of properties have changed at the same time or whatever reason. This is something like a RigJS scan, or similar to things like computed properties in Mobix or Vue or similar state management solution. Obviously, that's one of the ways to reduce the boilerplate code. And of course, the things which I really don't love, when we have observables as a part of the component API, which later on used in template with async pipe, which sounds like a nice idea, but it never was. It makes it simpler to use something which from async nature inside of our templates, but it does not make it a good idea in general. So, and for example, bind property for any observable, any subject, wherever we have it, has a snapshot, and only this snapshot will be actually displayed in the template or HTML, because HTML is a static. So why not to use this bind, for example, a property thing which could do more complicated beans. For example, on first and second things, what is happening here that whenever ID property has changed, so you have a component with input ID or property ID, whatsoever, doesn't important. Whenever it change, it actually triggers a fetch to the backend with this ID. Then when you have response, you have a static response, right? And the status of this response itself. And you're able to bin the results to your component. Imagine doing the same thing with the way how you do that. I could bet that would be not 4 lines of code. That will be a lot of boilerplate as usually, unfortunately, because I do the same things. So, and one of the samples, I did cut it a bit down to lesser amount of the screens, but gathering all of those ideas we discussed before in something more real life. For example, when we have to select country, then select state, and then select the city name. And your component will have something like this, because you will have input property to search. When you press like country name, you start to enter it, then you go has a fetch. That fetch returns you an object where it has full name, ID, and the list, because when you pull it, you have to store the list of the, for example, countries. And you will be using ithing to show those observables, and some plus minus primitive code how you pull this data as a method. In terms of view composition API as a clear approach, it will have a similar structure. You can see here a reactive object, which make it observable. You see computed properties, which is interesting thing because they work. There are two options like implicit or explicit reaction on some change. In this case, it's implicit. So you see that computed property doesn't actually know which property has changed, and that's some magic behind the curtains which happens here in order to make this work. So how can it be in our case? Our component eventually, at the end of the day, will look like this. So you have three classes with properties and 3 services which has a behavior. That's it, plus minus. If to look inside of one of those setups, basically how that works inside, that you have a country name. When country name change, you run fetch by name, and then you bind the result to the list of countries and maybe something additional, like currently selected country. And obviously that will reduce amount of the boilerplate code, and it sounds like a set of the helper methods. It is. So basically that doesn't even new paradigm of the development, but it's much simpler way with much lesser efforts to produce readable, maintainable, and extendable piece of a code. While I'm really excited about it, I had to switch to the model federation, and I really hope and actually working on currently, for example, and in Nginx Bootstrap, we have a support for Bootstrap 3, Bootstrap 4, and now Bootstrap 5 is in beta. So we need to add third set of templates. And I don't want to repeat all of the code in templates, for example. I don't want to repeat all of the components code. So obviously I use lazy ways in order to provide a new set of components which are providing me functionality. Without boilerplate, I am lazy developer. Sometimes it's a good thing to have. So whatever you do, don't try to never try to make things perfectly from the first try. Make it work, then make it pretty. So whenever I'm trying to work through the composition API, I said something new to me too. So I'm doing it as I get used to, and then just removing the boilerplate code when it works as expected. After all this, try to think about how it could change, for example, Angular CDK in your libraries or your applications, how much boilerplate code you can reduce. Try to remember those cases when you need, for example, type ahead, but with a bit different match behavior, when you need to copy paste all the type ahead from somewhere and then implement inside of it your special behavior, which happens a lot actually. And with this approach, you just need to provide different implementation from one of the services which is used in that type ahead, and you will have a new behavior, which is awesome. Of course, testing feature functionality could be completed isolated from view. So in this approach, your behavior is mostly not related to the template. As far as you remember, when I was showing several parts of the split, how you can split checkbox, only one of it was actually showing properties which will be used in a template. So that's like 1/5 of all of your inputs or like API surface, which you actually have to test with the component itself. And I would say that's the most of the things I would love to share with you today. So thank you for your attention, and that's all, folks. Of course, you will be able to find the reference list up here in presentation, the end slide, because there are a lot of great work which was done before me, and I would love to give you credit for it for folks who did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you very much for presentation, Dmitry. Let's see what questions do you have. Please, you are more than welcome to write down questions, and I'll ask them for you. And also we have extra present from our sponsor Dax, the nice cabin luggage bag for the best question. So don't be shy. You can ask again any language you want, English, Russian, and Ukrainian. For Dmitry, it shouldn't be a challenge.
Bit of Deutsch and Spanish too.
Okay.
It's quite a hard topic just to get through. Hopefully, when it will become more popular, it will be easier to have it and ask questions. So it's fine.
Yeah, well, that's definitely a high level and hard topic. I understand a bit because I am well prepared. We already discussed it before.
Yeah, that's something around for a couple of years, but like trying to find the right way, to make complicated things, to simplify those. It's the hardest thing of our job, obviously. And to remove the boilerplate is something everybody strives to do.
Yeah, and the approach presented, as you already said several times, it's something completely different to Angular. Well, after first look.
Yeah, it's a bit different, but mostly is the Angular way, minus some parts. Mostly Angular. More with some of this approach, like mixing base classes and some other tools already used in Material, but it's a long road ahead in order to use it fully.
Okay, good. I see we have some questions. So I'll just put it on the screen. To be bound to the template, we need special directive.
Rev 0 is something from an G effect, which I would not suggest to use like right away. Okay, so this is the same way how you would use subject from a number. So rev 0 has a value on that. So you will have to use property.value and you will have that thing in your template. In Vue, it's this provided by compiler itself. In Angular, you will have to go to that approach when you make an observable primitive value, and then you have to actually listen for that value. Thanks, Dmitry, for a question.
Okay, one more from Dmitry. Does it work with Angular language service?
To some degree, this is part of the hacks which I was mentioning. So what does Material team currently? It uses input metadata property in component metadata, for example. Yes, in order to provide the list of the things. So yes, it's compatible to some degree. But again, Angular is able to comprehend one level of extending, for example, directive. It has a special plugin for a component, and at time of completion time, it's able to inherit the metadata too. So when you have a component and you inherit of another one, Angular language service plugin is able to cover it like 100% like a native one. If you do more than one nesting, like this cert will most likely be lost. If you have a mixture and then you extend it till up to some degree, it's like some parts will be covered, some not. So you will see the properties, but you will see the documentation for those properties because those go from TypeScript and those works. Will you be able to fully comprehend Angular language service plugin? No, because the features which will relate on currently Vue engine or later on whenever it will be available Angular language service which is based on Ivy, some parts will be missing. But that's not a big deal because names, types, documentation will be available on the template through the Angular language service. Hopefully that answers your question.
I think it is good. Thank you. And one more question from Vitaly. So what's the difference between decomposition and composition with dependency injection? Because all the stuff can be implemented with composition services and use the dependency injection of Angular.
You mean like in G, hopefully, if I understood correct, you compare NG effects with the way how I do propose things. In NG effects, you basically write in the pure functions. So I would not say that you're able to actually use dependency injections the same way you would use the services. Obviously, you can push inside injector and use that injector with some types in order to pull some additional services. That's true. But you should remember that injector on its own is not compatible to all of the other things which you can do through the decorators to the properties on the constructor or other way around. So it's almost there, but not the way how you usually do the things.
Okay, good. And one more question from Ivan. It's like for messages, it's difficult to put on the screen, but that was the previous one for about maintainability, and basically the question itself. Could you already maybe you already faced some problems with your team and new teammates?
Not sure how that's related to the topic. Like let's try to answer one by one.
Highlight the previous part of it. So it's
okay. That's not even a part of I would say it's like a part of any approach which you want to scale. Whenever you have some like team-wide or product-related context, your best practices or your agreement to respect some boundaries, that's obviously requires some onboarding and education of the team, right? Mostly if you have the old code written, it doesn't like approach I use. One of the things I needed, it's because of its simplicity. So, and the onboarding itself is not a big deal. It's around just several helper methods, which just removes the boilerplate mostly, and how you split things. The couple of tricks, obviously, is inputs, outputs, and that empty directive. But like, if you need to push, add couple of properties and to see where it came from, that's something you could do, for example, through Visual Studio Code just by control-click on the name. It will lead you to proper class. So could be issues if you don't have onboarding. If you have onboarding to how you develop things, should be fine, hopefully.
okay. Good, good. I think we have all the questions, so now you need to select the best, your favorite one.
Second question of the Dmitry, could you show me to me again?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, that's something I didn't thought too much, but after this question, I will have to recheck it again. From my experience, that's something which was quite hard to remember and trying to imagine how to work with properties related to the view engine and how a language service does work. So I would prefer to choose this question.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So, Dmitry, please contact me to get the nice present from Dax. And Dmitry, our speaker, Dmitry, thank you very much for the talk. It was really interesting and high level experiments.
Thank you for hosting me. Nice to see everybody. Have a nice day.
Too. Okay, and we are moving to our next speaker, Alexei. So please share your screen.
Just a second.
If you're ready, we are like going earlier than schedule, so if you need a bit of time, we can.
No, I think we can start.
Okay, great. So I give a word to our third grade speaker, Alexei. You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good night for someone, maybe. The talk is called It Only Seems to Be Fast, and it will be about perceived performance. But first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Alexei Kremenko. I'm a senior developer at Yandex Music, where we develop the best streaming music service for more than 15 million active users. I am also Google developer expert in technology Angular. Also organized a lot of Angular Moscow meetups, so you may know me because of that. Also author of Russian version of Angular documentation, Angular 24.ru, and holding Twitter account Angular Russia. I'm also a founder of Angular.ru, like really large Angular community with more than 5,000 people. So if you're not joined yet, why not? So it's already time. So also you can find me on the internet, on Twitter or any social network by the nickname Avenger, and my Telegram channel Avenger Nodes. So feel free to join. I also developed a nice extension for Angular. So if you haven't tried it, give it a try. It's extension for Visual Studio Code, which allows you to automate refactoring of your Angular applications. Also, at my free time, I'm trying to teach, mentor, and help people to learn machine learning in JavaScript and Python. So, for example, if you want to study machine learning, you want to do it in JavaScript or write code in Python, feel free to join to those communities. The PyTorch is not made by me, but anyway, it's really interesting and a hot topic right now, so feel free. Now, couple of spoilers. It's this talk is not about Yandex or any experience in Yandex right now, but at the same time, this talk will touch the topics and techniques that used by Yandex, Google, Facebook, Avito, Sber, etc. by the many components. Now, the code examples will be in Angular and Eric.js simply because Angular is awesome. Okay, so the first thing I want to start is to make a simple statement. Performance is a requirement right now. It's not a nice to have feature that you can, okay, I have it and it's nice. No, it's a requirement. Now, there's numerous studies made by Google, Facebook, any huge company that show direct correlation between dropping in performance and loss of money, and dropping in performance and poor customer satisfaction, which also lead to loss of money. So, okay, performance is really important, but one thing always bothered me, like what is the root cause, like psychologically, what's the problem? Like, is it so hard to wait? Like, wait a couple of minutes. Like in dial-up times, I was waiting 5 minutes to connect to internet. Not a problem. Well, let me show you an example. Like, you have a website and you need a click checkout button. Like, it's all you need, but it's loading. It's loading. Not another bundle. No. Please don't stop. Another 2 MB bundle. No. Okay, so you may be familiar with this kind of situation, and it really proves that waiting can cause an anxiety, uncertainty, discomfort, stress, irritation, or worse than everything, plain boredom. All of those feelings you don't want your customers to feel and be experienced on your website. So, how to reduce this waiting time? How to reduce the wait? Well, we must do everything quickly. Now, before you jump in and say thank you, Captain Obvious, I will mm, not be lazy and tell you one more time that increasing actual performance will decrease the waiting time. It's kind of obvious, but it's really important. Now, there's a lot of tools and techniques like the tools like Lighthouse, DevTools Profiler that allow you to measure performance and even have some best practice built in. that you can use. But anyway, one thing you need to understand, like, even if you do all of this, even if you do it perfectly, this may simply not be enough. Like, what? How's that? Now, let me tell you a story. A story is about when the speed alone is not enough. Well, one American airport have this like well-known by everyone problem. Like when the airplane arrive, like passengers go to the airport and the baggage travels on the other route to the baggage claim. And usually you have to wait your baggage like somewhere around 30 minutes. And it's a good case if you need to wait 30 minutes. Anyway, people were complaining, so they gathered the best engineers, like really smartest people, to optimize this time, and they made this waiting time 8 minutes. Like, it's insane, like 8 minutes and you get your baggage. It's awesome. But the funny thing is, people still complained. They were still unsatisfied with the experience. And this is when they tried something different. What they did is they strategically located airplane on the other side of the airport. So what it allowed them to do is that the people have to travel to the baggage claim, and the time of travel was equal or slightly bigger than time to deliver the baggage. And so the thing is, when the people came to the baggage claim, the baggage was already there. And this was awesome. All complaints have stopped immediately because people will get the baggage immediately. But weirdest thing is the time to deliver the package was exactly the same, 8 minutes. So what on earth have they optimized? Like, they didn't optimize the time, they didn't optimize performance. It's exactly the same. Well, the thing that they optimized is called perceived performance. So remember this term, it's really important. Well, perceived performance is a really, really large field. And actual real performance is really important core part of it. So, for example, if you optimize actual your application performance, it will be perceived as application that is faster. It's only logical. But here's one thing. You can use various tricks, smart design patterns or smart design of your application, and also setting your priorities straight to make perceived performance actually better. So your perceived performance will be awesome without touching actual performance. So you make it look and feel fast, even if the real performance is getting worse. So it's all actually based on the fact that people really bad at measuring time. Like, I can tell that for myself, I'm really bad at it. And funny thing, we actually can use this flaw of a human to use against him to make him happy customer. So let's try to do this. Let's look at some best practices we can apply. I divided them in a couple of categories. The first category is don't block your user. Okay, you might say, it's not me. I'm not blocking anyone. My application is perfect. Well, does this resemble something? Do you see it in your application? If yes, then think about it. Spinners actually is not a really good option. I will rather say it's not an option at all. Well, let's see. For example, we have a table of users and we have delete button on one of the row of the table. So we click remove, we fetch the data and we remove the item. And during all of the time, we're showing these annoying spinners that doesn't allow us to do anything. But what we can do is we actually can just register the click, show that we register it by changing some state, like telling person that we're removing this item. And while this request is happening, we can unlock user and let him do other things like delete other items, do something awesome and not wait. And if everything is fine, we will show him notification that everything is fine. And if there's an error, we show notification that there is an error. Well, it's simple. But you can say that, oh, okay, I can only make one request at a time for backend or architectural reason. I don't know. So we can use eric.js here. So we can use the power of higher order observables, for example, concat, and we can use it to create a simple schedule of observables that will be, for example, in this case, will be executed sequentially one after another. This is like the simplest case, and you can create more sophisticated one depending on your restriction and limitations of your API or your frontend. You may say, okay, I need to block the component because while I removing the item, I cannot change the attribute, etc. So I need to block this component. It's not logical to work with it. Okay, so what you can do is to avoid one like common pitfall. For example, NGX Spinner, also component for spinners, have one awesome option that called full screen, and you can set it to false to prevent showing spinner on the full screen. You know, it may sound obvious, but a lot of people just making like blocking the entire screen just because they didn't thought this through. Well, and if you're still skeptical that this shouldn't even happen, I will tell you an awesome story. I was invited in Sber in their sub company called DomClick for housing, and they invited me to the internal meetup where I was talking about the same things about perceived performance, and I was talking about spinners. And after some time, I talked to the people, and they say, "Hey, we found the places when we were blocking user and showing spinner that it wasn't necessary." And we fixed it, and it helped. Of course, it's not like it will fix every problems in your application, but think about, look at your application. Do you really need to block an entire screen for one request? Now, second advice is to lie. It's usually always helps to solve all of the problems. Anyway, so what I mean by that, what I mean about lying, well, I mean illusion of speed. Now, generally, the illusion of speed I will be referring to is based on motion blur and the effect called chronostasis. You can read about it more on Wikipedia, on other sources. It's really interesting, like how we can trick our brains and like make it think that times goes differently when it's not. But I would not right now. Let me just show one example. For example, we have two spinners, one with Roadrunner and one with Coyote. So as you see, the speed of balls is exactly the same. But when we increase the amount of balls on the Coyote, it starts spinning faster. And if we increase it even more, it's like 2 times faster. Well, the funny thing is the speed is exactly equal. So what you see is an optical illusion, actually. And it's mostly based on the motion blur. Now, how we can use this effect of motion blur in, well, the spinner with Coyote is fun, but how we can use it? Now, we all know the progress bar, and it's plain boring component. How we can help here? Now, if you add these stripes that will be animating backwards, they will create this counter movement. Then you will perceive, actually, people perceive this as faster. But if you add one more thing, if you increase the momentum of animation, so the closer to end, the faster it's go, user will start to perceive it even faster. So overall, by combination of stripes and momentum acceleration of animation, you can get more than 12% perceived performance increase. So people will think that this lower progress bar actually faster on 10% when it's actually not. Well, there's an interesting study about that, but you can use it in Angular. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find good component and I hadn't time to create myself, but there's good chunks of code on CodePen that you can use as an inspiration to create this kind of component, this kind of progress bar. It's not hard at all. Now, the next thing is the skeleton. Well, what is this thing? It's actually the best alternative to spinners that you can have. Well, you probably saw these kind of weird patterns like circles, line, rectangles when you load LinkedIn or, for example, entering a Slack. So this is exactly a skeleton. A skeleton is something like a rough sketch of your application. It will show the places where the content will appear, and it's make you like see and feel like the content is loading. It's not static. Well, by playing with it, and you can actually gain like 10 and 20% increase in perceived performance depending on the situation and configuration. Well, for example, this awesome study showed that 18 individuals confirmed that overall they perceived the skeleton as a faster loading screen than everything else. Well, in Angular, there's an awesome NGX skeleton loader that you can easily customize to your application theme, and you can actually easily show it and build your skeleton. So you show it by default and then replace it with an actual content. Easy as that. Well, the next category is to be optimistic. What does it mean? Like, everyone saw this example, like in Counter-Strike, you run behind the wall and you killed. Of course, this terrorist is a cheater. This cannot be other way. Well, actually, it's not. Actually, what you see is the effect called latency compensation. So, what does it mean? Like, for example, if you are a counter-terrorist and you making a headshot in the terrorist's head, you shooting at some coordinates, so terrorist in some coordinates in the space. So what you're doing is you send it to the server, those coordinates, for confirmation. And at the same time, the animation of terrorist death is showing to you. So you seem like you killed him. But what's actually happening is the server confirming the terrorist was at those exact coordinates. So he was traveling at those coordinates. And after it's confirmed, it sends you confirmation. And after this, the terrorist get this notification that he have to play death animation. Now, after you have a confirmation, nothing is actually happening on the UI. So this confirmation step is not visible to you at all. But what's happened in the case of the race condition? Well, this is really interesting. We have to look at that. So, for example, if terrorist and counter-terrorist shoot roughly at the same time, well, they both see the animation that they killed their opponents, like the counterist killed terrorist and terrorist killed counter-terrorist. So server gets those two notifications and decide who was faster. After that, the counter-terrorist get the confirmation that everything is fine. He's actually have to do nothing, so nothing has happened. But the terrorist actually gets the confirmation that he was really late. And what's happening here is really interesting. The animation of death is canceling, and the terrorist is playing death animation for himself. So you may have experienced this if you played on really crappy network on Counter-Strike. So it may sound a little bit complicated or unfamiliar, but if you heard latency compensation, you should know that there's actually another word for it in front end called optimistic UI updates or optimistic updates. So the best example, that the most famous example is Twitter. So if you notice, when you click like button, the request actually still pending. The time to make this request happens in 2 seconds request to the server, but The like button appears like it click immediately, like right now. So what is happening is that we change the UI and only then doing the synchronization with backend. Well, the simplest example in Angular is actually like mind-blowingly simple. So, for example, you're making post request to add item. So what you're actually doing, instead of like adding item on list when it actually added on server, you actually adding it immediately. So you're doing this optimistic update. You thinking like, okay, everything should be fine. The request should be successful. So when the request is actually successful, you have to do nothing. This is the best part. I really love to do nothing. So this is like the best example of it. But if there's an exception, there's one really interesting thing we have to do. We have to do the rollback of our application state. So what does it mean? We need to remove this item that we already added to item list. And after that, we can show an error message. So this is the important and the most problematic part on optimistic UI updates. The other thing is really sad is that they are working differently for different state managers. So EricJS, MobX, etc. have their own implementation. Apollo have their own like quirks and implementations. So I wouldn't even bother to show all of them. Just go to the links of all links at the end of the talk. I will give you this link and I will provide you with some example for different state managers. But for now, it's the simplest thing is just find the example of optimistic UI update for your concrete state manager. Now, after that, you really need to show exponential excerpt. Like what I mean by that. Well, optimistic UI update is problematic in case of rollback. So, for example, if backend is slow or giving us 500 error, we have to roll back. It's annoying for user. It can be confusing, and so there's a lot of problems with that. But what we can do is we can reduce this factor. How? Well, if backend, for example, give us 500 error, it doesn't mean that backend will not answer won't give us a success code after next request. So what we can do is we can add a retry. So we can retry our request each time until it's successful. But infinite retries is a really bad idea. It's like it's like the best road to hell. So to avoid that, you have to add the maximum amount of retries. So for example, we have 3. So we will try 3 times before failing this particular request. So we'll send 3 times to backend before finishing this request. So but here is one big problem you may face. This called self-made DOS, like distributed DOS. Well, what I mean, imagine, for example, that your backend for a second just tired and return everyone 500 error. Usually you get requests almost randomly for different users. So you have your load to your server is kind of split and it's like almost equal on the all of the timeline. But if, for example, server deny everyone and everyone will retry, they will retry this request almost simultaneously. And what will happen is like instead of like 100 RPS, you will get 10,000 RPS at 1 second. It may actually be a disaster. So there's actually a pattern to fix this. The pattern called exponential backoff. And lucky for us, EricJS have additional module backoff EricJS that implement this operator, so we don't have to implement it ourselves. So there's a simple operator. We have like 3 lines of configuration, and after that we will add initial interval, max retries, and reset on success. All of that. Now, one additional small thing you can add to make you look like you an awesome architecture guy. Now, is to add random shift. What I mean by that? So remember when I was telling you that if everyone retries at the same time, you will get like this denial of service. Now, what we can do is we can shift everyone by the random shift, and thanks to the distribution, we will get almost not perfect, but distributed curve of request. So they would not start everyone requesting. They will start at different time. So each interval and each retry to our server will be happening on different times. This will really, really help. Next advice, I think it's my favorite one so far, is to predict. Like, now, how we can reduce waiting when you can't speed up anything, like you can do nothing. We just need to do it in advance. That's it. Well, imagine that you are selling an ice cream. You have an ice cream shop, and you know that at the lunch, a lot of people are coming in to have a nice ice cream snack after a lunch. And you have a huge line. So what you can do is you can prepare those ice cream in advance because you know there will be a lot of people. So same thing we can do in front end. We can, for example, preload images. This is like oldest hard school example out there. So what you're doing is you're creating the images, set source for them, and do nothing. What I mean by that, like really nothing. We just loading them, and they end up in our browser cache. So after they are there, if you visit the page that have those images, actually, your application will use browser cache, and you will get those images immediately. Well, this nice piece of JavaScript is awesome, but is there anything more sophisticated or like better? Well, actually there is. There's a thing for grown adults. It's think, for example, you have a style sheet that you use on your second page, and you want to preload it because you know it will be the next page that user clicks. So what you can do is you can add attribute rel and define it as preload and declare it as style type. Well, there's a lot of different types that you can preload, like audio, video, fonts, or for example, fetch request. Even that you can actually preload. So there's actually a different types of preloading. There is prefetch, preconnect, DNS prefetch, prerender. I wouldn't go into a lot of details because all of them have their own things and abilities, but you can save a lot of work on your page by using those. So you can save like huge amount of load thanks to that. But it will make your application better, but there's one catch. For example, imagine if you prefetch all of possible combination of models where using it can go. For example, you're on your home page, user can go anywhere. So preloading it will require like 2 megabytes of all of your application. Like this is bad. It wouldn't improve your application performance. Okay, what we can do is we can prefetch only visible links. That's better, like we only load in half of it, like 1 megabyte. It's better, it's nicer. But there's one thing that we can do. We can add some machine learning actually here. So that's is really hot topic right now. What I mean by that, there's a library made by Google called GuessJazz. What this library do is actually it's using Google Analytics to predict where users are going to go. So for example, it will analyze that almost all of the users on Thursday go to this link. So it will use predictive prefetching with machine learning to predict what have to be prefetched. And you can load only 7% of your actual bundles. So this will really be performant. There's one problem, one caveat that you should know. It works something roughly around 90% accuracy. It really depends, but don't expect too much more. But anyway, overall, your 90% of your users will get awesome user experience, like really perfect one. Now, this library have adapters for Angular, Gatsby, Next.js, and Nuke.js. So as I told you before, all the examples can be used in any language framework, so keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about clicks. Why we need to talk about them? Now, we really need to talk about clicks simply because the clicks is like the most common thing that you do. And when we click something, we usually expect something to change, like some work to be done. So if we learn somehow to predict the click, like predict it ahead of time, we can actually start a lot of work ahead of time and do it really, really faster. So how to predict a click? Now, the most obvious thing is to actually use other browser events, like for example, mouse down or hover. And sometimes you can save like even a second before the actual event is happening. It depends on circumstances. But anyway, hover is really fragile because not always when I hover something, I want to click it. So we can like moving our mouse randomly, so that's not really good thing. So the most safe choice is to use the mouse down. So in Angular, it's straightforward. We just change our event to on mouse down. That's it. Now, prepare right now to have your mind blown. Now, look at this awesome library. It's called FutureLink. Now, if we look how fast it can predict. Now, if we see this library is actually predicting the click even faster than hover event. Like for example, it can save like it can be faster 200 or 300 or 400 milliseconds faster than hover event. How do they do that? How is that possible? Is this some another machine learning magic? No, it's actually pretty simple. What this library is using is deceleration pattern. So when your mouse is decelerating its speed, it's usually mean that you are dropping the speed to click on something. And by analyzing the vector of the acceleration and speed of the deceleration, we can actually calculate what the component you want to click, and it's work really, really well. I mean it. Now, unfortunately, there's no right now component or directive or library for Angular, so feel free to create one. But you can easily have this some custom JavaScript, and just by passing the components that you want to use this FutureLink model to work on, you can pass it to predict your components that will be clicked. And it also give you a probability of the element is going to be clicked soon. So this is really, really nice. And let's ask ourselves one question. What a user really desperately want from us? Like he wants UI, the user interface, and it consists of HTML, CSS, and images. This is like the crucial part. I don't mean that JavaScript is not needed, but this is like what really, really user wants, like really, really much. So what we can do is we actually can render HTML, CSS by ourselves ahead of time. Like the most sophisticated and the right way to do it is to use server-side rendering. We can do it in Angular with Angular Universal. And to add server-side rendering is simple as adding schematics Angular Universal Express Engine. Of course, there's a lot of caveats. Like, for example, there's not every application will be able to work in SSR mode. So you, for example, to make your application work in SSR, You have to rewrite it from the ground up. It's really inconvenient sometimes. So what we have here is we have static pre-rendering. It can save us a lot of time and money. What does it does is if you add custom builder for Angular CLI, you can customize your Webpack config and add pre-renderer spa plugin and define some roads that need to be pre-rendered. So those roads where user can go, and you can use Nginx to or save those files as entry points and serve them via Nginx or other static host or dynamic host to give the access to the page faster, to the page actual content that user expect. Now, this is what I called the static pre-rendering for poor. Now, imagine that you need static rendering, but you don't want to mess with all those configurations of Power. You can actually open DevTools and type this line and copy content of document element outer HTML and paste it to the index HTML of your file. That's simply it. Now, if your application like changing its styles or content like once, twice per month or per year, why not? It's also an option. Don't think it's some insanity. It's actually viable options to do this kind of pre-rendering like manually by yourself in DevTools. Now, let's recap what we learned so far. First of all, don't block your user. Lie to the user. Be optimistic. Show some exponential excerpt and predict. By using all of those techniques, you can actually make your slow application look like really shiny and fast. And your users will be really happy. So, some words in conclusion. Now, despite all of those that I said and all the excitement about perceived performance, it is very subjective metric. So I feel it's faster, I don't feel it's faster. Like it's really subjective. It's really hard to measure. But we actually can and should measure it like real performance. But to measure it, you need to gather some study group of 100 people, ask them a question to test a hypothesis, to check it, use some scientific methods. But anyway, how we get that amount of people? I'm just making small page for some small website. How can I get those amount of people? You can actually use power of Yandex Toloka. This is actually not an advertisement. I really use this service a lot because, for example, you can do a side-by-side comparison for 100, 200 or 1,000 of people with really small budget. So you can help your performance and check it, verify it, not to do it just like I like it. You can check it, verify, and be sure that it's going to help. A lot of actually large company use the service to do some user experience, some testing or user experiments. So don't be afraid to use it. It's really awesome and powerful tool. Now, after all I just said, like all the problems, caveats, etc., do we really need it? The code is more complex. There's much more work that we need to do. It's become really difficult to verify that your solutions is actually increasing perceived performance. Well, maybe we shouldn't try. Maybe we should leave as everything right now. Well, let me quote the greatest philosopher of our days, Shakira. Try everything. I mean it. Try everything. Try everything except drugs. Never do drugs. And that's all. Thank you for your attention. Stepan, I think you offline. You mute microphone.
Yeah. Thank you. So, one more time, thank you for presentation. That is really interesting topic, and yeah, it's always interesting to compare things and to know that sometimes these performance metrics and sometimes psychological things do matter more than actually some performance metrics for people. Okay, I'm waiting for the questions for performance. I'll take a chance and ask mine about pre-rendering. Have you looked at a project that is called Scali, Angular Scali, also for pre-rendering?
Yeah, sure. I didn't include it here simply because Scali requires you to change your application code, and I was trying to show you that static pre-rendering is you can apply it in a way that wouldn't require you to rewrite your code at all. So there's plugins that allow you to do static pre-rendering without any efforts of rewriting application. So if your use case of your application is really fits in the static pre-rendering, you should really use this Scala. It's really awesome, but you should remember that it requires some work to do on your side to make it work with your application.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, thank you. I see we have questions coming. So the question is, how difficult to use skeleton comparing to spinners?
Well, it's actually not hard at all. But one thing that you should need to remember is that skeleton should not look exactly as your content. It should be like some rough sketch. So one thing you can do is to show your user interface to to your friend, to your family, and ask them to draw it with the pen. Just draw how they remember it looking with the rough shape, with circle, rectangles, etc. And you can use it as a sketch to your skeleton, like the simplest example I have so far. So you don't need to look at exactly the same, but it should have like same margins, same spaces, same colors. They should use some colors. So it will require a little bit more work to do. Of course, that's true. I would not deny that. But it's not harder to implement because the skeleton itself is static. So you don't need to do dynamic skeleton. It's overkill. It doesn't require it. It would not help. So it's really simple. It's a job that you will do once. So it's harder than spinner, but it's not that hard. You need to do it once, and you will reuse it after that.
Okay, good. Next one is very much related. Also, taking into account existing project and skeleton, the complexity.
Well, in existing project, once again, it's not that harder. The hardest part is just to tune it to your application style. So you need to spend some time like setting the right width heights for those circles, to lay out the elements, set margins, paddings to make them look like your actual UI. So that will require some time and tinkering, but as I said, it's one-time job. And once again, do not try to like replicate your UI one to one, like spend a lot of time to that. The point of skeleton is to like trick your brain is that when the content appear, that it's not appeared, it's actually was on the page. So don't try to like make it perfect. The user will understand that it's not the content. It would not help.
Okay, good. Thank you. Next one about feature links. So, does it work well with multiple objects which are placed one near another?
Yeah, it's the feature link works really good actually because this deceleration pattern and the speed of deceleration, like if you have the basics, like the raw basics on the any like game engine, physics engine. Like you understand that it's all predictable. It's not like some weird voodoo magic. It's science. Anyway, despite that, there's sometimes it happen like um, it can happen that the click was not intended actually and user clicks something else. So you have to have this idea of rollback or way to cancel. Thanks to observable, it's really easy to cancel like HTTP request and other stuff. But for example, if you probably should not use future link for delete your account button. So this may end up ugly. So
Yeah, sure. Okay, good. Next one about have you ever used prediction library on real project?
I used not prediction. I used like the simplest stuff on when you predict the click, the tap. For example, I had the case where I developed application for iPad 2, like old version of iPod, and the application was really slow. And one of the optimization, there was actually a library fastlink. Maybe people heard of it, that allow you actually register click faster. So previously, old browsers, old iPads have like this delay, like 300, 400 millisecond before register click because of different touch event. So you register on touch, you check that user doesn't move your mouse, and you okay, this is probably a click. So I already use that technique, and it's helped to increase performance on old, really slow engine and JavaScript engine, and make it look and perceive as native application. Like people will really mm, like enjoy by using this interface, simply because we was using this technique, and this technique is well known, so it's not a problem. The biggest problem is that you really have to think when to use it and what the rollback should be. As I said, with any optimistic updates or any predictions, you have to have like this rollback prepared. So you need to know how you can roll back in case of an error. So error may happen, and you need to design this rollback case. So that's one annoying thing that you have to think really hard when you're doing full production.
Okay, good. And one more question regarding the extra traffic usage and preloading resources. What do you think? For some, I don't know, situation when you have limited internet or don't have unlimited internet, and that's extra traffic for you.
Well, that's really simple. You should have at least mental image of your users, or you should at least know your user base. So you can open Google Analytics or Yandex Analytics, even better, and you can analyze what's your user base, from what countries they are, what internet connection they use, what internet speed or they have. And also, thanks to the modern API, we have like information about the internet connection, so we can know if user on Wi-Fi or on 3G. And overall, if you use Guest.js, it's actually really helping a lot, like really a lot. So it's the case when 90% of the times it will be correct. So the overall amount, yeah, there may be a user who would not be lucky, but if you split your code on small chunks, the penalty wouldn't be so big. It's like 10K, but this penalty will be for one of 10, and not for everyone. If you bundle everything together, like, and everyone is going to suffer. So this is like the case you that you need to consider. I wouldn't say this is a problem. I never saw like the prediction libraries prefetching like a huge problem. It's gonna be a problem if you try to prefetch and preload everything. Yeah, that's true. For example, if you on one page and you preload every possible page everywhere, then yeah, it's going to be the problem, and user will complain, of course.
Yeah, and probably if you want to be creative with this optimization thing, as you said, you can check user agent connection, and based on these parameters, just
Make a
do
decision.
not
Or
refresh.
if you really care about user opinion on that matter, you can give them an option, like user setting, like I want like fastest experience, or I want the most traffic safe. You can provide them an option, and they will be really pleased, especially if the traffic is critical for them. So here you better to know your user base.
Yeah, true. Okay, next one about payment request and whether that's good idea to do this optimistic thing.
Yeah, like I optimistically think that everyone want to send me money. Yeah, that's really optimistic. Well, anyway, um, as I said, when you do it for production, you always have to think about rollback. This is like the biggest concern that you have. So, for example, one case that is legitimate for this optimization if is a login. So what you can do is, for example, if you have username, password, and the login button. So what you can do is you can, when the user filled all of those two fields and trying to hover the login button, you can already send request to login. So when user click on the login button, you already know if authorization successful or unsuccessful. So it doesn't change anything, and it would not breach your security because you just send in this request ahead of time. What you One thing that you need to do if you it is you need to increment this like your amounts of retry by one, because user may this prediction may be accidental, so you need to increment it by one. But other than that, it wouldn't compromise anything, it wouldn't change anything. So you really need to look on the case. So in case of the send money to someone, yeah, you should not do prediction. But for example, if user entering that he wants to send someone money, it's really wise idea to load all possible bundles to the next windows. For example, the check window, to load all of the assets from that. So you can avoid predicting business logic, but you can predict in user experience UI logic.
Okay, good, thank you. And next one about when it's better to focus on improving backend performance instead of front end, I guess.
Yeah, really nice question. And I can generalize it by saying like when it's better to improve real performance, like front end, back end, no matter what. And there's actually a good study about that. Like the study says that if you cannot increase your performance like by 10 or 20%, you probably should not bother about it. So, for example, if you increase your real performance on the backend on 1%, the amount of effort may not be worth it. So, by using just optimistic update, for example, like Twitter, like they spend 2 seconds to send like on the backend. It's huge amount, but it's totally fine. We don't have problem with that. So you really need to like measure how much of the effect of the performance you can get by spending this amount of time. It's an example of the airport that I told you earlier. Just by using other techniques, psychological techniques, they get much better user feedback. They don't spend this amount of money. They just can't deliver the package as usual but get this benefit of happy customers. So here, once again, it really depends on the case. But overall, there's overall rule that you may also know that the difference in 100 milliseconds is almost invisible to the user. Like if something happens faster than 100 milliseconds, you may not notice it. So if you pile those performance optimization, like you improve here, and overall you get a lot of performance improvements, yeah, you should. But if you work like a lot, like rewrite your application and get like 5% improvement, it may not be worth it. So you should really consider how much you can do.
Okay, so I think a good advice. Next one, also from Alexei. Is there a situation when it's better to change Angular to something else with better performance?
Well, I would say that I'm as an Angular developer expert, I would not advise to use anything else. But to say seriously, I don't think that modern frameworks are the problem, really. Like Angular, Vue, React, they all have almost all basic state manager libraries. They have like Redux, all of them have their own implementation. All of them have alternative with local stores like Angular, Vue, React, etc. So really, I don't think modern frameworks is the problem at all. Just talk with your colleagues. If they all have experience in Angular, use Angular. If they all have experience in React, use React. But try Angular. Well, anyway, so it's really the matter of taste. But I would say that the framework here is not a problem. I showed examples using Angular, but all of those examples can be applied in React, Vue.js, or vanilla JavaScript.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think that was all questions. Now you need to pick one that you like the most.
I think I like the most about backend performance. It's really a good question. Thank you.
Like when the time this one, when the time is when.
Yeah. Alexei.
Okay, so Alexei, please contact us and you'll get your extra present. And now it's show time to raffle the main present from our sponsor. So I'll ask Alexei to help me to do some random. Maybe you can share your screen again.
Yeah, just a second. Okay, so what's the numbers that we have to play?
Actually, I have already sent you the list of names that people that register, and you just need to put names.
Okay.
There is no number. There's names, comma separated. If we have.
Okay, then I need.
Maybe another one, another random.
Yeah, just a second, then maybe there will be other questions meanwhile.
While we are creating our random function. You're welcome to add more questions about performance, psychological things, machine learning for performance. I also tell you that at some point, and at Angie Likens, it was really interesting talk about Angular machine learning and lazy loading strategies, that you can predict which modules will be loaded, and you can preload only modules that you expect user will use, but not preload all the modules.
Yeah, that's actually really awesome technique, and Guess.js is one of the way you can work with that. But actually, with power of TensorFlow, the browser machine learning library, you can actually create your own engine with your own custom rules and your own prediction, and you can actually tailor it on the client side. So this machine learning model can actually learn user patterns in the browser to understand how it's work with your website without sending anything to backend. So privacy will be sealed, but this is one of the cases you can use.
I see one more question. Please advise some good book. Good materials probably for performance and understanding performance.
Yeah, I got that. But a lot of information that I got for this talk, or like about perceived performance, is actually not in the books, but more in some like papers, scientific papers. For example, the papers about motion blur and speed. It's the scientific paper. It's really boring to read, but it's really detailed with all of the example and scientific study. And you can use it if you want to, but you really need to like tailor understand it. So what I did is I just opened those studies and learned them a lot, read. This is the best I can advise you so far right now. I haven't saw like perfect book. Unfortunately, all of those came from some studies, from IT companies and from scientists.
So, how far are we with
Just a second. Just a second.
Do you want to use Guess.js or?
Yeah, right. In machine learning
Try
application
to like to find correct
yeah.
name with help of machine learning. But for this, we will have probably to train machine what is correct.
Okay, just a second. So I have list of users and one
Shall
simple
I
small. So let's do this. So number 35. Sorry.
Could you make font bigger, please?
Yeah. Sure. So
okay, we will do real thing. I expected you to open something, some random, but we will do real thing.
yeah. So let's let's call our function. It's as this was an example. So let's use it. Okay. Now, who's gonna be the winner? Number 24. Oh.
You probably need
Jesus
to split, yeah. You need to split the line, but we already know that it's number 24.
Yeah. Just
Now
a
it's
second.
even more intriguing.
Live coding. Live coding is a disaster. Alexander is here with us today.
Yeah, it's important. That was the rule that you need to be present. So please, we are waiting for your comment. If you are here, if not, we will do one more round.
Okay.
While we are waiting for Alexander, I see one more question from Holy War question from Ivan. How is it doing with React instead of Angular?
Well, actually, I learned a lot about Angular really long time ago. And one of the project was to create a cross compiler that allows you to write simultaneously on React and Angular. So this was a really interesting problem, and I have a lot of experience. So right now I don't have any problems to work with Angular or React or Vue.js, so to speak. And personally, I don't think the framework is really important. I really love Angular. That's true. But it's no one is like forcing me to say that. I really love it because of TypeScript support, because of React.js built in by default. So it's just a matter of projects that people are more comfortable with React. I don't really see the problem here. So, no one?
I think we can do it one more time. 37.
No. It's
Oh no,
just
it's not executed.
okay, 1, 2, 3, go. Number 11. Max,
Okay.
are you here?
I hope that Max Karpovets is here. Otherwise, we will do good testing for our random engine.
It may actually take a while.
You should also take in account that we have a delay. It's how it normally works when you do broadcast, and it's delay about 20 seconds with YouTube. So, but I think we already had to get the message. So one more time, please.
Okay, now who's next? Who's next? Okay, number 25.
And Alexei Koshelenko.
Come on. By the way, what's the price? I don't know, maybe
Pair of good noise cancellation headsets. Oh, headsets. Headphones.
Yeah.
Headphones, sorry.
Guys, you shouldn't miss this. Come on.
I wouldn't mind to have such headphones for myself. Unfortunately, I didn't register.
Oh, we have the winner.
Okay. Let's assume, yeah, ASK is he. Okay, so please.
Thank you, everyone.
Contact us, and thank you very much, Alexei, for great presentation.
Thank you for inviting me.
For the prize. Okay, and that's it. Thank you, audience, for being with us. And we'll inform you when we cut all these videos and put it separately in a nice way. Okay, see you all.